Good morning. Welcome to church this morning for what is hopefully our last ever pre-filmed watch party Sunday morning service. We're so excited to have you watching with us today. We have an exciting week coming up. On Wednesday, the 4th, we have our family fun event number 3, which is the free movie night at the Stardust Drive-In. Movie begins at dusk. We're watching the movie Sing. It's lots of fun for your family. Bring your friends, neighbors. You can tell everyone it's first come, first serve, and they have a limit of 150 vehicles. So gates open at about 8:30, and we hope to see you there. Also, August 8th is our first live service, and we're super excited about this. We hope you can come to the building and join us here live, 10:30 in the morning. Check the website before you come, mordenalliance.ca, just in case there's pre-registration required before you get here. So we hope to see you then, and join us in singing.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my doom till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my doom till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old me knew Jesus when I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my
storm went away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We'll shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We'll shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. Shout out your praise. Shout out your praise.
Hey, if you've been watching with us before or joining us, you know that we like to take time to pray together with whoever you're watching with at home or wherever you might be. And so this morning we want to remember C, who was working in the desert sand and is now home looking to what's next. So we want to remember her in our prayers, and also for the Pembina Counseling Center. So we can be praying for those people as well. And let's also remember to pray for rain.
When I was in Bible school, I encountered something that was amazing. As a hungry teenage guy, this was kind of like my dream. It was an all-you-can-eat cafeteria. Food wasn't always the healthiest. I think about 80% of the meals were deep fried, but it was usually pretty tasty, and there was enough variety that I got to try out some new foods, which is something I really enjoyed doing. And one of those new to me foods was quiche. So it's not something that I grew up eating with my family, but I really liked the idea of it. So every time it came around in the cafeteria rotation, I would take some and put it on my plate and I would try it. Every time, I hated it. Some people would say, well, stop putting it on your plate. But I was determined that I wanted to like it. So every time around, I would take it and I'd try it. And eventually, somewhere inside me, a switch flipped. And now I love quiche. So here's our first discussion question for today. Can you talk about this with the people around you or comment in the live chat and answer the question, is there a food that you hated at first, but you grew to love? Our likes and dislikes can be rewired. For some people, it's olives. For my son Benji, it's hot sauce. And he just learned to love it. Now he won't eat anything without it. And after a while, we can go from disliking something to actually missing it when it's not there. So now it's a desire and we actually want it. But it's not just food that we can rewire ourselves to want. We can do that with pretty much anything. We could download a simple little game on our phone just because we're bored. And pretty soon we're so addicted to it that we can't stop playing it. And in our brain, it's still playing over and over in our minds as we're trying to fall asleep. The things that we spend the most time focusing on become the things that we desire the most. And desire is not a bad thing. There's plenty of examples of good desires. You could desire to do well in your job or your studies. You could have a desire for justice that drives you to defend the innocent. And we all have a desire to be loved and to have a purpose in life. But what about when our desires lead us down the wrong track? What if the thing that we desire is something that doesn't belong to us? It could be an object, something that belongs to somebody else, like a really awesome guitar or sports car, hypothetically speaking, of course. Or it could be an ability that someone else has that you wish you had, like being the best in your sport or the smartest in your class. Or maybe it's an experience that you wish was yours, like an amazing vacation that a friend of yours took across the world. Our next discussion question is a bit more personal, but it's something that we've all struggled with, so I want to encourage you to be honest and just share something or someone that you've been jealous of, either now or in the past. This is the topic that the writer of James is talking about in the passage we're looking at today. We're in James chapter 4, and we're looking at verses 1 to 10. We're going to read the whole passage as a whole, and then we're going to come back to it and look at it in more detail. So James chapter 4. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again. If you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate, that the Spirit He has placed within us should be faithful to Him. And He gives grace generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter, and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor. The overall theme in this passage is that God's ways are opposite from the world's. And the world functions with pride and jealousy that tears others down so that we can get on top. But God's kingdom functions in a humility that isn't looking to draw all the attention to ourselves. The audience James is writing to, it's a group of believers, and apparently they struggle with the same thing that has caused almost every fight in the history of the world. It's jealousy. He says, "What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them." They want something that belongs to someone else. It's a battle as old as history itself. Satan was originally one of the greatest angels in heaven, but he decided he wanted more. He wanted to be greater than God. So he started a rebellion in which instead got him and his followers thrown out of heaven. Then Satan used that same desire in order to trick Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. He told them that if they ate the fruit, then they would be like God. Next, Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel, continued this pattern. Cain was jealous of his brother, so he murdered him. But it's not just these so-called bad guys in the Bible that struggle with destructive jealousy. One of the most famous examples is that of King David. He was called a man after God's own heart, and he wrote most of the worship songs in the Bible, and even he fell into the same trap. It happened during a time when his kingdom was at war. Normally, he would have been out there leading his army out in the battlefield for weeks or months at a time. But this time, he apparently decided to let his generals do all the work, and he stayed home to take it easy. With all this extra free time to take naps in the afternoon and stroll around on the palace roof looking over his city, he noticed an especially beautiful woman taking a bath, and he wanted her. He asked around to find out who she was, and he was told her name was Bathsheba. She was the wife of a soldier in his army named Uriah. At this point, you'd expect that the godly King David would back off, knowing she was married, but no. His desire was so strong that he ignored what he knew was wrong, and he had her brought to the palace, and he slept with her. And it turns out she got pregnant, and then when she told the king, he tried to cover it up, his sin, by sending for Uriah back from the battlefield and telling him, "Go home, take it easy and go visit your wife." But Uriah proves to be more noble than King David in this story, because he says to David, "The ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents, and Joab and my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear I would never do such a thing." Well, since King David's plans to cover up his adultery didn't work, he instead hatches a plan to have Uriah killed. So he tells his general, "Station Uriah on the front lines, where the battle is the fiercest. Then pull back so that he'll be killed." After Uriah is killed, David ends up marrying Bathsheba for himself. It's pretty sobering to think that even someone like King David could be so affected by jealousy and desire that he would resort to adultery and murder. Thankfully, when he was confronted about it by the prophet Nathan, he responded with humility, and he repented of what he had done, though his actions still had some serious consequences. He responded in all the ways that this passage in James talks about. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. Sometimes our desires for something that's clearly wrong, like David's lust for Bathsheba. But what about when we want something that in itself could be a good thing? James continues by writing, you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. It can be really hard to know our own motives. We could have a desire to do something really nice for someone else, but it's possible that our real reason for doing it is just to make ourselves look good. And this is something that I've wrestled with many times in my life as a musician. I've been part of leading worship music ever since high school. And at the same time, I've been part of bands that wrote and performed their own music. I've often felt that internal battle between the two. In the early 2000s, I was the worship pastor at a church in St. Catharines, Ontario, and a few of us started a band and we started writing our own songs. The songs all had a Christian foundation, but they were more performance kind of songs than congregational worship songs, so we started performing out more, and I kind of started thinking about pursuing the band full-time and moving out of the worship leading role at the church. But then God stepped in with a pretty clear answer one day. We would often have these citywide worship events around the Niagara area, and I was in one of these bands at one of these events one night, and after the event, this lady who I'd never met before came up to the stage afterwards, and she told me she felt God wanted her to tell me something. She seemed really genuine, and this wouldn't have been the first time that God had spoken to me through other people like that, so I was really interested in what she had to say. She said God wanted to tell me to stay dead. Now, that was obviously not what I was expecting, and she could tell that I had no idea what she was talking about, so she explained it. It meant to stay dead to myself and live only for God. It comes from Galatians 2:20, which says, my old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So at that moment, that may not have been the answer I was looking for, but it was exactly what I needed to hear at that point in my life. Both options that I was considering were good things. Both could be used to draw people to God. But God knew my heart, my motives, and my weaknesses. He knew that the better option for me was to stay where I was, leading worship in the church. The next section in James chapter 4 says, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate, that the Spirit he has placed within us should be faithful to him. So, what exactly is James referring to here? Is he talking about literal adultery? In some translations, the word he uses is translated, you adulteresses. Why does it sound like James is calling out the women specifically? Well, actually, the feminine word here is used not to point fingers at specific people that James is writing to, but to bring to mind the image of this covenant relationship that God has with the people of Israel. It's like a marriage. And most of the first believers, they were Jewish, and in the Old Testament, the Jewish people are often described as God's bride. The most obvious example is in the book of Hosea, where God tells the prophet to marry an adulterous woman and be faithful to her, even though she's going to repeatedly cheat on him. And this is supposed to be an example to the people of how God is faithful and takes the people of Israel back over and over again, even when they stray away from him and get sucked into following the world and its false gods. And that fits right in with the overall theme of this passage in James, that you can't be faithful to both God and the way of the world. The two are opposite, and they're incompatible. They don't mix. When the people of Israel live by the standards of the culture around them, they're behaving like a bride that's being unfaithful to her husband. And this points out something else about jealousy. God shows us that there's a good kind of jealousy, the kind that a husband and a wife have in marriage. because they've promised to be faithful to each other in an exclusive relationship. And that's what the Bible talks about when it describes God as a jealous God. He's not being envious of something that doesn't belong to him. It's actually the exact opposite. He's being protective of a relationship that means everything to him. Just like those of us that are married, we should be protective of our relationship with our spouse. As we can see by the many broken relationships around us, being faithful is difficult. And staying faithful in our relationship with God can also feel like it's always under attack. It's easy to get pulled away and have our desires rewired toward the wrong things. But there is good news. James says that God gives grace generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When we act in pride and try to do things in our own power, we're easily sucked into sin. But if we're humble and admit our own weaknesses, God gives us grace, the power to live the way He asks us to live. So the rest of this passage in James emphasizes this key to defeating jealousy and pride, which is humility. So humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come close to God and God will come close to you. I think a lot of this comes down to our sense of identity. People that are insecure in who they are often trying to make themselves look more important or more powerful, even if that comes through otherwise good things like serving at church. They might be jealous of the status that's associated with being a leader. It can become a competition. We want to make ourselves look more important, so we try to make friends with people that we think are more important. On the other hand, the people that have a healthy sense of identity, knowing who they are as children of God, they have a quiet authority that's confident without trying to show off. And Jesus is the ultimate example of this. The example that comes to my mind is at the Last Supper. And in the Gospel of John, John writes, Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and he would return to God. So he got up from the table and took off his robe and wrapped a towel around his waist. He poured water in a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had around him. Now this was the job reserved for the lowliest servant in the room, not for the rabbi. And Jesus wasn't just a human rabbi, he was God himself. It was because Jesus knew who he was, and he knew the authority that he had, that he could show such humility and serve his own students like this. And he then told them to go and do the same. But sadly, they didn't seem to get it. Or maybe they just couldn't defeat the evil desires at war within them. Because shortly after Jesus gives this example of humility at the Last Supper, we read, the disciples bickered over which one of them would be considered the greatest in the kingdom. Jesus interrupted their argument, saying, the kings and men of authority in this world rule oppressively over their subjects, claiming that they're doing it for the good of the people. They're obsessed with how others see them. But this is not your calling. You will lead by a different model. The greatest one among you will live as one called to serve others without honor. The greatest honor and authority is reserved for the one who has a servant heart. The leaders who are served are the most important in your eyes, but in the kingdom, it is the servants who lead. Am I not here with you as one who serves? So what does this look like in our lives? We can see that simply changing our behavior is not the end goal, because even our good behaviors can be done with the wrong motives. The first step is realizing that God loves us and we don't have to prove ourselves to Him or to anyone else. If we put our faith in Him and know our true identity, then we don't need to try and impress anyone. Then we can live with the humility that Jesus showed, rather than the pride that the world wants us to have. Pride is selfish and is focused on what is best for me, but humility is focused on what is good for others. With this humility and the grace that God gives the humble, we can rewire our desires to be in line with the kingdom of heaven instead of the world. And I've found the best way to do that is by just starting to do the things that you want to desire. So, do you want to like quiche? Then start eating quiche until you like it. Do you want to enjoy exercising? Well, then start doing it even though you don't feel like it. Do you want to desire your spouse more than any other person? Then spend more time with them than any other person. The things or people that you spend the most time and money and energy on are the ones that will become the most important to you. Well, chances are that as we've been talking about this, God may have brought to mind an attitude or an unhealthy desire in your life that He wants to help you to rewire. And one of the first steps of knocking down our pride and living in humility is admitting that we have issues. Or maybe something came to mind that's a good desire you want to cultivate and help grow in your life. So our last discussion for today is going to be this one. What's a desire in your life that needs some rewiring? To wrap things up, I want to share one of the verses that's been a big encouragement to me in the last several years. Psalm 37 verse 4, and it says, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." It's a challenge to us to make Jesus our main desire. And when we spend enough time with Jesus, we start to desire the things that He desires. And when our hearts are in alignment with His, He takes joy in giving us those good things. And the best one of those is more of Himself. So let's pray. Jesus, thank you that you gave us that best example of a leader who is willing to serve. Being God, you gave up everything. You gave up the splendor of heaven to come and be a helpless little baby and then to serve those that you were teaching. So I pray that in our time now when we are all trying to make ourselves look better and draw attention to ourselves, that you will help us to not focus on that you will help us to put others ahead of ourselves, to follow the example that you gave us, to celebrate with those that are having successes rather than being jealous of them, and to be content with what you've given us and to live in simplicity and humility. Thank you for giving us that example. Amen.
Thank you for watching with us. I just want to remind you, if you are looking for prayer this week or anytime, feel free to email us at prayer@mordenalliance.ca, and we would be privileged to pray for you. Also, if you're looking for ways to give, to bring your offering in, you can come to the church Monday through Thursday during regular office hours. You can give online. All the ways are located on the website, mordenalliance.ca. Don't forget to check the website before coming next week to see if you need to pre-register. And we hope to see you on Wednesday at the drive-in. Have a great week.